Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Things Money, yet another episode. And today we have Mr. Faraz, who is a director at Alkaram, which is one of the larger textile groups in the country, and they're doing a lot of other things as well. So, Faraz, tell us what you're doing nowadays.
Hi, Ammar. Thanks for having us over. Alkaram is predominantly a textile company. I think it's a name that most people instantly recognize and respond to. We've been in textiles since 1952 in one way or the other. We carved out as a separate entity, so Alkaram became Alkaram in 1986. Since then, we've had companies carved out of us as well, and we've continued to focus on textile predominantly. We're one of the largest exporters from Pakistan. We export between the States and Europe almost $170 million last year. We also have a chain of retail stores across the country with the name of Alkaram Studio. That was some of the initial diversification we did. However, a few years ago, we started seeing some pressure on the very fundamental basic economics of pricing within textile. And what you have is currently a dollarized input, which was your cotton, that would produce a dollarized output. Now, as long as your rupee is stable and if you have the forex to maintain that, you're okay. However, what was happening year on year is your rupee was falling. Now, most people think that that benefits the textile industry. However, what most people don't know is that you have to continue to import those USD components, your cotton and other yarns and stuff. And so you put pressure on your working capital every year. And we realized very quickly and very early on that this would mean, along with inflation and other aspects in your energy rates, it would also mean that your margins get squeezed every year. You are servicing those imports using PKR and PKR denominated debt. With that in mind, we thought about diversifying. And rather than look at a business and say, this is the business I want to do, we started looking at different sectors and defining what we wanted. And what we wanted was to break the cycle of USD denominated inputs and a USD denominated output. What I wanted was a PKR denominated input that would produce a USD denominated output. And so one of the first things we got into was agriculture. And I say this, we got into it before it was fashionable. So nowadays, I think there's a lot of groups, a lot of companies who want to get into agriculture just because it's the word of the month and there's a bit of herd mentality at play. We got into it for a very basic reason, which I just shared with you. We followed that agriculture investment up with one into aquaculture. And aquaculture is just like agriculture. Instead of farming crops or orchards, you are farming fish and seafood products. And so we started developing what is Pakistan's premier shrimp farming facility. This sector didn't exist, so we actually had to build the entire sector, including work on the regulations. We had to interact with a handful of institutes to create the rules around it. And that's still an ongoing process, even as we've started our operations. We followed that up with an investment into a drone entity. And so we saw that farming support services were missing, and we ourselves wanted to provide some of those services. And we have a AI tech drone firm. It's called Farmable. I'll talk more about that, I suppose, as we go on.
All right. Thank you, Faraz, for the introduction. So you said around $160 or $200 million is your export sales. How much would be local sales broadly?
So last year, in PKR terms, we did about 14 billion, which translates in today's one just over $50 million.
Yeah. All right. So it's primarily export oriented. So tell me, Faraz, one thing that you said was very important, that cotton is imported and you've got dollar input and you've got a dollar output. Why isn't there more effort in essentially strengthening your backward linkages and grow cotton Pakistan? I mean, we've primarily been a cotton growing area, and that was the competitive advantage. That's why you've got a lot of textile industry here. So what really happened that we cannot grow that cotton anymore?
So we actually because I have an agricultural entity, we experimented with growing our own cotton. And what we wanted to do was just figure out where the breakage in the value chain is. Where is the value not translating across? And I think if the mills generally, all of the large textile companies, had they worked on this together over a handful of years, you would have had a much better cotton sector. But they continue to value everything in terms of price rather than in terms of quality. And so when everything is valued just by price, what happens is you have misaligned incentives. The picker is paid by how much she or he picks. And what that means is they won't just take the cotton bulb, they'll take a handful of leaves because it will be more. So you get trash content. Then the ginner, same way, is paid by value rather than quality. Again, he will put some trash in there. So the quality of cotton that comes out of Pakistan has a high trash content. What you get imported, for figures, you have trash content 6-7%. Locally, trash content is as high as 10-11%. And to get that trash content out, those machines that do it, they reduce the fiber lengths. And so you get lower quality cotton output as well. And so to correct this, you'd have to do a sea change that we experimented with. For example, the bags that they collect the cotton in and they later cut, those bags have materials, a PV material that you won't see it until it goes into the final product, and then it ruins the cloth. So we talked about having maybe cotton-based bags that the women could use. And when we were talking about it, I told them, don't design a bag that you change their muscle memory. So if they're used to picking it and putting it like this, make sure that the bag you recreate is the same. And so there's multiple steps. You have to pay the pickers based on quality. You tell them, this is what it looks like if it's clean, I'll pay you X for this. This is what it looks like with trash, I'm going to pay you X minus 1 for this. This is terrible, I'm not going to pay you for this. And so you align those incentives with your own requirements. And that's something that's historically not been done. And a lot of people often tend to blame the government. In Pakistan's a going thing, what has the government done? I always go back and say, what have you done? And I find that more and more the times I ask this question, there's a silence because nobody's actually taken the effort to go back into the value chain and sort this out.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, cotton picking has been done for centuries at this point. It's not something that's totally new, completely out of the ordinary. You've got maybe like 50 top exporters in the country who make the bulk of value at textile exports. Yeah. Why isn't there some kind of a consortium, like a clean cotton, high quality cotton, whatever, you can call it whatever, and the whole value chain is fixed? What is the hindrance here? What is the impediment that does not allow you to do like proper backward integration?
There would have to be a very concerted effort. You'd have to have a high degree of comfort around groups and people that work with you. So what you're saying is there's 50 groups. Now they're spread across Pakistan. You have a handful of them in Karachi, in Punjab, etc., etc. You'd have to agree on exactly what to do, how to go about it, where to grow it, how much to grow it. And the more parties you have involved, the trickier it gets. I think trying to do this at a smaller scale might make more sense. That's something we're actually in the process of doing ourselves right now through our agri entity as we expand. But I think it would be a bit of a fallacy to hope that a lot of these larger groups will get together and work in a meaningful way.
What can be done to improve overall quality of cotton? Because this is a problem, right? We solve this problem, you're solving multiple problems at the same time.
So look, what the government can do is just work with better seed regulation. I think some of the seed regulations are very poor. Very often what you see in the bag is not what you see coming out of the ground. There's inconsistency, there's unreliability of good seed supply. But that's where I think the government's role should end. And I'm just going to give you one example for how we changed something. We were buying crab from some of the local fish harbors. And what you need is crab to come in alive so that you can then process it so the meat doesn't get ruined. It spoils very quickly. 0% of the crab landings at the time were alive. We went in and we simply said, we're going to pay you X% more if you get us crab that's alive. Today, over 90% of the crab that comes into that harbor is alive. The government did nothing. There was no policy. There was nothing because it doesn't need to be. The private sector needs to step up. All the government needs to do in 90% of the cases in this country is just yield the way to people who can then find solutions and do something about it. And remember, economic incentives drive the conversations and the decision-making for almost everyone. It doesn't matter where in the socioeconomic ladder you are. If you can provide an economic incentive, people will respond to it. And that's where I find a lot of people lack. They wouldn't want to give that premium, but they want that premium product. Yeah. That's not how supply and demand work.
Why aren't the incentives are there? There's a very clear output that can be generated. A lot of savings, margin expansion that can be done. So the incentive is there. Why isn't it being done? Is it because maybe the existing groups are too, let's say, divergent? They just want to do different things. The board of textile, why isn't it happening? Why are we still importing cotton when we can enhance value here?
You almost answered the question while you asked it. Why are we importing the cotton? Because it's cheaper. It's easier. There's less trash. It just makes more sense. Unless you begin to solve all of those issues simultaneously, the quality of the cotton, the pricing of the cotton, the availability of the cotton. You have to remember we are now a water scarce country and cotton is a very water intensive crop. If it makes sense as a country, for example, the shrimp farming that we're doing.
Just to add to this point, rice is also very water intensive, but we export tons of rice. Why can't we use internal cotton?
I think cotton has, again, rice, once you have picked it and you processed it.
You just like, it doesn't add, you don't really have to add a lot of value.
Much to it. cotton has a lot more stages, and there's a lot of higher chances of spoilage. Once the bulb is open, if it rains, it's done.
Essentially, for cotton, you have to reform your ginning and your spinning
And you're picking.
so you have to
The entire value chain.
entire value chain.
Has
So
to
it's just
change.
cheaper to might just import it.
It is much cheaper to
Be done with it then.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just makes sense. All right, coming to live crabs. I mean, I've always said, we've got like a 700-kilometer coastline, maybe more than that. And we barely export any seafood. Why is that?
So actually, yes and no. We export quite a bit of seafood in terms of volume. However, most of our trawlers, the big ships that go up, they are not chilled. They don't have proper processing on board. And so what you get is essentially almost spoiled fish by the time it gets to the harbors. And that gets processed into something called fish meal. And what that means is the same amount of fish that you could have sold if you processed for $5, $6, $7 a kilo, you're selling it like $1.50. So in terms of quantities, we export quite a lot. My shrimp farming joint venture is with a Sri Lankan entity. When the counterparts came to Pakistan and they saw the amount of catch coming into our harbor, they were shocked. They said, this amount of catch that you get in one day, we don't get in a week. And yet your exports are far lower than ours. So again, to correct that, you'd have to go back to changing the regulations around how some of the trawlers work. But bear in mind, and this is where I think aquaculture really comes in, fishing in the open seas and oceans is not sustainable in the realist sense. Our fish counts are falling. And so aquaculture is actually the solution for this, where you build fish farms or you build shrimp farms. These are both high value items that can be exported for a good dollar value as well. And that becomes a sustainable business in and of itself.
So what gives Pakistan, the competitive advantage in terms of doing aquaculture? I believe you can do aquaculture pretty much everywhere in the world if it's just like creating a pond out of nowhere.
If it was just creating a pond,
I'm just talking.
Sure. No, I'll just tell you one very simple fact. You said, what's the competitive advantage? I'll tell you, just the first thing is you need to catch up. Forget the advantage. Right next door to Pakistan's east border, Gujarat, this state forms the bulk of India's exports from shrimp.
Yeah.
Almost $12 billion is what they do annually. Now, compare that to our total exports of around 400 million for all fish products and about 40 million for shrimp. They have the same climate, they have the same water temperature, they have the same geography, they have roughly the same people, right? The people are the same across the borders. And so what's lacking is just beginning to build that ecosystem and beginning to work on it.
So let's just do a thought experiment. So we're around $400 million exports right now.
That's fish and everything.
Everything, all of aqua.
Yeah.
What needs to be done to get this to, let's say, $5 billion in 5 years or 10 years? 10 years, let's say.
So I'm going to talk about the shrimp industry in particular.
Let's just talk about one product and build it from there.
Let's just talk about shrimp then, because that's what we're doing at our farm. And we picked up one of the things we picked up was shrimp farming. We started working on it. It fulfilled our criteria. That was step one. Now, today exports are almost nothing. But here are some of the factors that will change this. Number one, your economic cycle, your cash conversion cycle for shrimp is only 4 months. What that means is from the time you put the seed into the water to the time you're able to completely harvest it, you're generating cash in 4 months. For other products such as fish, for crops, all of it varies, but it's much more than 4. For fish in particular, it's 18 months at times. And so
isn't that a good thing, 4 months? You can just...
Yeah, of course, because you can at least...
move on quickly with it, turn over quickly.
You can turn over your cycle twice.
Yeah.
So that gives you a big base. Number two, we had exports to the U.S. banned. And the reasons for that, we don't have turtle extrusion devices in our fishing nets. And so we spoke to the U.S. economic team and we said, why is there a ban? They said this reason. I said, I agree. And I said, do you have the ban on India? They said, yes, we do. Same reason. I'm like, I agree. I'm like, then why is India one of your largest exporters and we are? They're like, oh, yeah, that's a good question. And so it turns out that there is a proper procedure for you to have a certified product from a farm rather than the ocean. And even with the ban in place, you can still export. So if you can just convert some of the existing fish farms in Punjab, you have over 13,000 fish farms. If you can explain to them, here's your shorter conversion cycle. Here's the seed, here's the feed. We've domesticated those components rather than having to import them. So you have a PKR input. Now, can you produce that dollarized output? They should be able to. And even if we convert just 10% of those farms over the next 2-3 years, we can realistically hit just $2 billion worth of export from this one product.
From just shrimp.
Just shrimp.
So who does this? Who talks to these 13,000 pounds?
So here's very interesting bit. Because we sort of were leading the conversation with the rules and the regulations, the tariffs. We worked very closely with the SIFC to make some of these changes. The Punjab government has been in touch. They've spoken to us a handful of times. They're working on their own PC1 to make that a case. We think that this will be a combination of public-private partnership. In the sense, not really a partnership in the sense of a JV, but the fact that they do part of the work, we do part of the work.
Let's say I've got a fish farm in somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm just making fish, selling it, not barely making any money.
Barely making money.
What do I need to do to start exporting fish? What will you tell me? I'm a fisher.
You won't be able to at this stage, given our current supply chains.
What interventions do I need to make such that I'm in a position to export shrimp in like 18 months?
Well, look, first and foremost, you need support. And in this case, the government is willing to start some of that support to say you can start farming. You need to identify whether the water you're using is fresh water or brackish.
So that's what I'm saying. Let's keep the government out of this, like we did earlier in the cotton thing. Let's just keep government out of it. It's slow, it's inefficient, it's bulky, so on and so forth. What, as a private investor, as a private capital holder, I need to do to convert my fish farm into a shrimp farm or set up my own shrimp farm?
Well, if you want to let's talk about both of those in one swoop. You need to identify your water. If it's slightly brackish and you're having trouble growing crops, that's actually generally very good for shrimp. It needs slightly saline water. And so that means tracts of land which are not suitable for agriculture all of a sudden become very tenable for something else, number one. Number two, you've already got producers of seed in the country and more are coming up. So you know that your supply, rather than your input being 12, 15 rupees per seed, it's going to come down to 2, 3. So now you know your input costs, what they might be and what they would shrink to. You have free producers coming into this country and importers and suppliers as well. So now you know. You have model farms like ours, which is, what we did is basically the same thing that people have done in the telephone industry. We did not put telephone cables across the country, but when mobile came, we jumped on it. So we skipped 30 years because we were late. The same thing in shrimp farming. Because we're late to the party, we're able to take the best technology and make it a thing. So what we're saying is this is the best in class. This will get you the best price if you do your biosecurity, your lining, your drainage and everything. And we can give that to them piecemeal. Like, here's the design.
What will be the capital cost to do all of that?
It depends. What do you want? Do you want to do a simple, for example, let's say you dig a hole in the ground, right? You've made a pond. It's just a hole in the ground. Water comes in, water goes out. To do that, your capital costs are almost nothing. You've just got to dig a hole in the ground. Bear in mind, you won't get that great a price. And your turnaround, because it's an earthen pond, will be over 30 days. If you have a line pond, your capital costs go up by quite a bit. But you turn that pond around in 2 to 3 days. So if cash flow conversion, getting to cash is important for you, that's what you do. For small farmers, just converting some of their existing fish farms, that's more than enough for them at this stage. The larger institutional investors and very large groups are looking at this. We're actively in conversations with them. They will probably do the capex heavily to get those farms into a state where, in terms
of that scale,
not just the scale, you have to understand, if you do all of the procedures and you tick off some of these boxes of requirements, your lining, your biosecurity, your effluent treatment, if you do all of those, you get a better price. So our perspective is, A, get some of that product out from where it can. Let's say these fish farms, let's just get it out, right? People like our large farms and processors will buy it and will sell it. Number two is the institutional investor, the heavy one. If he understands, or they understand, that they need to get into it and do the capex properly and get that better price, very likely in 5 years, those are the sort of groups that will be exporting themselves. So you have to break it down into sub-segments and see how you can help all of them along the way.
This makes sense. So how much thing do you think we are exporting from Pakistan?
Right now, we do about 37 million.
37 million. So that's like massive room for.
Yeah, it's absolutely nothing. But again, wild caught and ocean caught is falling out of favor everywhere.
So it's better to just start with aquaculture.
May as well, right?
Yeah.
Again, you've got 30 years of lag that you've not caught up with the rest of the world. For context, in 1988, the Lipton trials took place in Pakistan. They were the first. We studied almost everyone who came into this space. You know, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? How can we make sure it doesn't happen to us or anyone? And so when the Lipton trials happened, their results were great. This was in 1988. But because of the political situation at the time, they left and they went to India. And so that industry that you see there today was a direct result of us not capitalizing on it then. Doesn't matter. It is what it is. Now we can just play catch up. So when you said, how can we be globally competitive? We're still playing catch up. We have cheaper labor. We're, in terms of transit, almost identically where India is. We have the same weather. So we have the exact same ingredients. We just have to
So one thing, I think, let's say you got a farm somewhere in Punjab.
Yeah.
How do you export? I'm just coming to logistics here. In terms of logistics, I'm sure you need some temperature control logistics, something.
Yeah.
To do that, you would need maybe like temperature control warehouses, temperature control storages, reefers till the time you hit export. Do we have that kind of infrastructure, or do you think a lot of investment is required there as well?
No, we don't have that infrastructure at Bulk. There is some of that infrastructure,
But
it's in pieces.
Value of like $2 billion plus.
Not
We don't
yet.
have that, right?
Not yet, no. But again, supply follows demand. If we see that demand coming up, there's more than enough capital out there. And genuinely, there
There is capital, that I fully agree with. There's sufficient capital.
that will find its way there. For example, one of the largest groups in Pakistan right now is actively making grain silos. And they had nothing to do with this space like 2-3 years ago. Just because now there is that demand. Last year's bumper wheat season translated into a lot of literally where do we put it? And so again, supply follows demand. And the same thing will happen over there. The day that you can say this demand is going to come up, there's nobody to service it, people will pop.
So it's a chicken and egg problem, like
what comes
else. What comes first? And you definitely have to, the demand is there.
Yes,
You just have to figure out how to create that supply.
Yeah.
And once you do that, the whole value chain essentially starts erupting.
It'll take time. So again, you have examples around the world that you can piggyback over. You can see the transition of the Indian industry, the fact that it had a very slow start and then it ramped up. The industry in Ecuador, which is the world's largest exporter today. So you can just follow what they did and you can sort of begin to plot those timelines. This is when supplies will begin.
So coming to Ecuador, why is it the largest?
Geographically, it makes great sense. They have extremely large pools of water, and 4 or 5 very prominent families in Ecuador decided that this is something that makes sense.
Just double down on it.
They went all in.
Yeah.
They went all in and it paid off for them. There's some of the wealthiest Ecuadorians.
Okay. Are just in shrimp farming.
Just in shrimp farming.
Yeah. Another shrimp farming. Coming to drones, another thing that you mentioned, we haven't really heard a lot of people working on drones formally in this market for one reason or another. So what has been your experience and how do you see the growth there?
You have to understand that drones right now, they're negligible across the country.
Yeah.
And you have no regulations around it today. We're working on some of those regulations. You also don't have proper demand. You've got some illegal use out of them. There was a case, if you remember, of contraband being smuggled across borders using these drones. And so the first thing to do is to develop that regulation, because as a drone operator, what you're doing with it is essentially you go over large farms, you scan the entire farm. It will come back and tell you everything from weed count to germination rates to plant counts. It'll tell you where your farm is not how it should be. And it can come back and feed that data into a computer. A different drone with pesticides in it can get up, go to exactly where the weeds are and spray just there. And if a farm has less than 3% of the area, use pesticide used in less than 3% of the area, it can be certified organic. So all of a sudden, you have the machinery to make almost any good farm as certified organic.
So that's like a massive, massive productivity boost.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Today, there's no regulation. So if I want to fly it,
So
I have to go
why do you need regulations for this?
Look, everything has to be regulated in some way.
It has to be, but it's like,
Here's why. I'll tell you.
do things first and apologize later. Let's say this is how literally the world works. So
Yeah.
why are we waiting for regulation? Why isn't there like demand from the market to do this and enhance productivity?
Not quite yet. So what happens is, if I want to fly, do it and apologize later, I have to get local permissions. With colonial era laws where I need, my local government to give me permission. And that's a tedious process. Every single time we go up, that doesn't work. And so what we're hoping to do is to create a platform where at least some drone operators get licensed, certified, and so they don't ever need a permission. You can just, so you have to build that ecosystem. And these drones now, with their ability to not just identify weeds, plant counts, sprays, picking, the applicability is quite high. It'll catch up with time. But again, you have to create some of those regulations. You have to form some sort of training institute that will get you certified operators. Those operators can then go and create that demand. Farmers will take it once that's available.
So that's my thing. I mean, I already know a lot of people just working on this, but as you say, it's very informal. It's very fragmented.
Yeah.
Why aren't they getting that demand? I'm sure if some farmer needs it,
Oh,
they're not going to say, okay, you know what, are you licensed or not? Why don't we see a lot more people just coming in and doing this?
You look, getting those drones into the country is also very difficult. These are not your camera.
Yeah, it's
drones.
just like massive, yeah.
These are massive. I mean, they would take up half of this room.
Yeah.
Right. So to get those sort of drones and smuggle them in is not a tenable business. And no matter how many you create, doesn't work. We want a structure whereby you can get those drones in. And as a farmer, you should know, here's someone who's certified to use it or can operate it or is licensed to use it, is readily available whenever I need. If you have that comfort, you rely on it. Right now, they can't rely on it. Also, there's not enough supply to create that demand right now. People just go, I'll just do it traditionally.
No, so essentially the demand is there, but supply is not catching up because of various constraints.
The demand right now is there, but the demand also looks at, like, for example,
The potential demand is there.
your plant count. You need to do your plant counts.
Yeah.
You have a 200-acre farm. How do you do it today? We send a drone, we get the count, we know exactly where we are. How do you do it? You send a farmer into the fields, he comes back and he tells you a number, and that's the number you rely on. So what we're saying is there's a better way to do it, and these are some of the things you can use to get to it.
Yeah. Oh, this makes sense. So, Faraz, what else are you working on?
So you know what, Ammar? Between those, they sort of take up the bulk of our time and effort. I know that right now while we sit here, sounds like not a lot, but it is. For example, on agriculture, we did a tomato project, the National Foods. What we say is you've been importing these pastes at a very expensive rate. So your dollar per ton was almost $18.40.
Yeah.
We were able to produce that with them in concert. They produced it through a processor for about $14.36 a ton. So you save $400 equivalent, but you've spent no dollars because it was all produced in country, grown in country.
Okay.
We did that. We're hoping to ramp up some of that production. We're also embarking on a very large agricultural project. We scoured almost the entire country looking for relevant land parcels. You've got a problem whereby in Punjab, you've got very small land parcels. In Sindh, you've got slightly larger parcels, but they're not contiguous. And then you've got to find parcels that are very large, let's say 1,000, 2,000 acres in one area that have good soil, good water. So we've been just working on identifying some of those parcels and beginning farming. That's on agriculture. We're also looking at an agroforestry play. We think that there's a lot of work to be done in sustainable forests. What I mean by that is we have about 160 paper mills in the country, but all of them import their pulp.
But that's not a lot of pulp.
That's quite a bit of pulp.
I mean, I believe 80-85%. Isn't this just recycled paper?
Even so, you're still importing.
You're still importing, yeah.
And that's, again, something that you can remove from your dollarized component of your import basket. If you can produce it locally, the transport costs, the freight costs, all of those come down. There's a massive industry out there. There is a challenge of how much of it is within the formal sector versus informal sector. But we've not created that supply for them to tap into. If you do, that supply will be tapped into. So that's a project we're looking at very closely these days. And then with the shrimp farming, we're creating the entire industry and also the value chain. So we've got the farm itself, which people visit all the time, and we're happy to open our doors so everyone come and see what we're doing. It's very interesting. But we're also saying that we need to move into the hatchery space, which is produce the seeds. We need to move into the processing space, which needs get the output ready for export. So you've got to create that value chain. There are other players who are also partaking. Someone's doing a bit of seed. Someone's trying to do a bit of farming. Someone's trying to do feed. And what's interesting about this space is because we're creating it, rather than work against each other and treat each other as only competitors, we're sort of working together. We felt that that was a better way to get our voice raised. And we've also had a great deal of success with getting the authorities to improve some of the regulations and some of the rules around it. They don't exist, so we had to build them and then make them a bit easier because they over-regulated it, which is the sort of the usual for us.
So I think we pretty talked it all quite at this point. One final question or thoughts. What do you think needs to be done? Or why can't we really scale up agricultural exports? What is the biggest hindrance? And like one thing, as you said earlier, unavailability of contiguous land parcels. I mean, that's a big issue. What needs to be done to really scale up agri exports? So I'll tell you where I'm coming from. If you study every East Asian country out there, every single East Asian country, you have to increase your agricultural productivity first before you can embark on any industrial growth plan. You cannot do industrial growth without
the agriculture.
Agriculture, improving your yields, feeding yourself enough, exporting the surplus, and then moving forward. So what needs to be done to really get to that stage where you're like, okay, you know what, our food prices are stable, we're exporting a lot of surplus, and whatever surplus is being exported, the proceeds are being used to industrialize. How do we get to that stage?
It'll have to be a multi-year, multi-pronged process.
Definitely, you got like a 10-year process.
Yeah,
15-year
more than that
process.
probably. But
What needs to be done today so that we're on that path?
little interventions can start to have very positive knock-on effects. We continuously provide support prices in this country, X or Y or Z. But if you look at the crops that have support prices versus the crops that don't, the crops that do the best in terms of yields and even in terms of exports are the ones that have no support. So the government needs to learn that you cannot continue to
Intervene in the market.
Yeah, just leave the market to do what it will. Your wheat, if you were supporting it at 100 rupees a kilo, the globe produces it at about Pakistani equivalent 65 rupees.
So sorry to intervene here. My favorite graph is basically the price of wheat in Pakistan from 96 onwards to 2024. And the price of wheat effectively tracks the PKR dollar parity.
Yes, it does.
So essentially, you're just betting on dollar when you're betting on wheat, despite being a producer of wheat. And that's mainly because you have a support price in place.
Yeah, and that's also our thesis. Remember, right at the very beginning, I said PQR inputs, dollarize outputs.
Yeah.
But what we've been doing in certain cases is dollarizing those inputs as well. However, I go back to my point where interventions by the government are not helpful as much as they think that they will be. And so if the government starts stepping out, the market will self-correct. This year, you've had a bumper crop for wheat and a terrible crop for tomato. And so tomato prices were very high, wheat prices were very low. Next year, so many farmers are saying, I'll grow tomato, and you'll have a glut over there, and wheat will then come back up in terms of price. And so if the government doesn't intervene at all, these fluctuations will begin to slowly even out. We've never let them even out, number one. Number two, and this is actually probably the biggest problem that Pakistan has, our population is out of control. The growth rate is absolutely out of control. And someone said it very well, that the population bomb is not about to explode, it's exploded. And that's a view that I share. And so you've got to continuously feed those mounts as well. You've got to feed all those people. We have one of the highest dairy producing countries in the world, but we have no cheese industry or value add industry because all of that milk is just going straight into the human supply chain. You're not able to bring it into processing centers or add that value up. So you've got to really work on figuring out your population, or you've got to outpace your production to your population.
So that's, I've got an alternate view there. I think it's great. We've got a high population growth rate. I mean, it's got a completely contra view to many out there. But the world and all developed countries in the world, they're literally struggling to figure out how to increase the population.
Yeah.
This is some kind of benefit that can be translated like major dividends if and only if you're able to educate, skill them, so on and so forth. Obviously, in absence of that, it's a complete disaster.
Which is what we've been
all
operating
time.
under.
So my view is, there is, again, as you said, catch up. We've got a lot of catch up in just in terms of productivity. If you do that, there is enough to feed and there is enough surplus to add value as well. So the question remains, how do we enhance productivity? One point being, kill all the support prices wherever. Even the price of milk is fixed in the city on a citywide level. Just kill all support prices. Let the market figure it out. What else?
You've got to do that human development. We have a large population, and while a lot of people think it is an asset, we've not seen that human development translate that asset into something that you can actually monetize. You've got a lot of underskilled population. And so, for example, if I need highly skilled agriculturalists for my farm, I cannot just go into the rural area and pick someone up, which is what I should ideally been able to do. I shouldn't have had to look very long and hard. I shouldn't have had to look about. So you've got that human development element has been not as good as it should have been over several years. And there's no quick fix for it. So,
but there's a fix for it.
Of course. There's nothing in the world that can't solve. You cited the rest of the world. The average growth rates for most of the world is about 2.1, whereas your replacement rate is exactly 2.0. So most of the world is holding steady. That's the average. You're right. There are a lot of countries that are under 2, and that means they're going to have aging populations and less people who support those aging populations. Like Japan, they're going to run into a different set of problems in the due course of time, especially with where their interest rates are today and where they might end up. They'll have some interesting ramifications. For us, our population rate is not near 2.1. It's already what? It's at 3.5?
It's 2.8%.
2.8? We need to bring that down to like 2.4, 2.3, and then continuously develop those resources as well. So you've got to train the kids better. Right now, the output that you get from most universities, for example, I want to hire some kids from agricultural university. We're talking about it these days. And when we were talking about it internally, the first conversation we had was, once we hire them, we're going to have to train them. So someone who's been completely schooled in that field, once he comes to us, has to be trained. And so what that means is the universities and the colleges are not producing output that matches what the industry requires. So that's also something you're going to have to look at.
That's a good point. One last thing, again, the third last thing I've said. So tomatoes, my favorite supply chain problem. Why the price of tomatoes does fluctuate? It's like an annual. It's not even an annual thing. It's a weekly, a monthly thing. Price of tomatoes can be anywhere between like 15 rupees a kilo, so 200 rupees a kilo. So it's not even a price that is fixed. And there are, I understand there's like seasonal variation in the way it's grown, where the demand is. How do we ensure stability in the price of tomatoes?
So that's one of the most sensitive vegetables out there, sensitive crops. You pick the most sensitive one, and then you've thrown into it that very high cyclicality, which I just told you about. Last year's crop was not that great. The prices shot up. Those prices are still high. But everybody in their respective families are getting into tomato this year in agriculture. What that means is next year you're going to have a very low price point. Those people will get discouraged and they're going to get out of it. That supply chain is not as much of an issue, but processing it and people's uptake of that processed product is. For example, I'm very happy to buy tomato paste when tomatoes are not readily available in the market, because I know it's exactly the same thing. But your average consumer doesn't yet understand that that's what it can be done. Once that development takes place, once that understanding seeps in, and you have those processing centers that are underutilized, they're actually shutting down because there's overcapacity, because that product into your metros, your stores, your larger, your metropolitan cities, and has not developed in such a way that people are ready to consume slightly processed rather than completely raw goods. That mindset changes.
So that's a marketing problem.
Marketing and industrialization. And so...
No, you've got overcapacity here, right?
Yes, by industrialization, I mean the acceptability of industrialized products. So I'm very happy to take that paste. I'm sure you would be too, to do your basic cooking, but most Pakistanis, if you don't give them that raw tomato, they wouldn't be very happy with it. So those sort of changes will take time. The cyclicality will average itself out as more and more people get into agriculture. You have to understand that a very limited pool of people have been into agriculture. Most people in agriculture were not the ones very highly educated, and finding those operators that serve as a bridge between the farmers on the ground and between the capital has been lacking. Even now, there are not enough operators. And I think that will be quite a cash cow for a lot of young people in the future.
So yeah, okay, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you, Faraz.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Very insightful conversation.
Cheers.
And I guess we'll see you soon again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you didn't get bored with shrimp, tomatoes, and drones. Thank you, and till next time. Bye.